Thanks, Douglas. I think sometimes there's a tendency to think of the privacy officer maybe through one of two models. The first model being that internal advisor, the other model being that external sort of inspector general type model. But I do agree with Douglas's point that you're really covering the spectrum. And I'll speak for just a moment to the DHS CPO role. I think that we are a hybrid. We do try to cover the entire waterfront. We're there at the beginning, just the very first day employees come into the department to do training and education, and we try to do that all along throughout their career. We tailor the training and education to their particular roles, to their levels of sophistication. We also continue that at the front end where we do compliance work. Before systems are built and put in place, we're brought in to do the initial spade work to make sure that whatever system is being built, that it meets the privacy standards at the front end. That's done through a very transparent process, through basic documents like systems of records notices and privacy impact assessments. There's also more of a back-end authority, which is to do oversight through regular audits and reviews. And finally, in the area of complaints and investigations, I want to just highlight that this is kind of more coming out of the oversight or inspector general model, is that at least in the DHS case, we have some very, very important authorities and powers which the CPO was given in 2007 under the 9/11 Recommendations Act, which is she has now the power to conduct investigations, take testimony, and even subpoena documents if necessary. So that is really the far end of the spectrum. It is that strong oversight stick, if you will, that can be used if needed. And I'm going to do a bit of a reach here that I like to think of, bear with me here, I like to think of the CPO as the Johnny Cash of maybe the agency. The Johnny Cash reference is that one of my favorite songs is I Walk the Line, and the CPO has to walk that line in between being the internal advisor but also having that oversight role on the other side. And then finally there is, of course, the public outreach, which we work very hard at, bringing in the outside privacy community. We hold regular advisory committee meetings, and we also meet regularly with the privacy advocates themselves to talk about new programs. So I'll leave it at Johnny Cash.
I can't think of a band singer or anything to cite to myself, but you know, the role of CPO it's different in every agency, and certainly different in the sense that DHS has unique authorities that other government agency CPOs don't have. But it's both. I mean, you certainly spend a lot of time, focusing internally and playing that sort of privacy advocate, privacy rabble-rouser internally. And depending on your agency's culture, having been at two and worked, very different agencies, one social benefit agency, one the agency that's in charge of business development, your perspective and your involvement is very different, and sort of the way you interact with all the programs is different. In commerce, it's a big department, lots of programs, lots of parts, definitely very old school in its historical approach to privacy. So there I would say I have been, in my 8 months, a very loud advocate, pressing aggressively for any fundamental change, pushing very hard. Commerce is very active in the policy area and is working, and you heard Cam say this on the first day in his speech. This is really something we're working aggressively on, is getting our house in order. I'm actually part of that effort, is getting our house in order. Bringing in a career CPO to run an internal privacy office was something that is identified as a critical need. So, I've made a lot of noise about doing better, and I started to push both at the departmental level and even internally into some of the bureaus, which at Commerce, because of internal politics, and I see people nodding over here, is a big deal. You know, the internal politics of an organization can impact a lot about how effectiveness works. And at a department like Commerce, pushing on the independent operating units is a very big deal. They don't. It's something that they're not used to, and so by organizationally placing me where they did, I'm working directly with the assistant secretaries and undersecretaries to push that action, which is not normally where people are used to hearing this issue be raised. So even in the short period of time I've been there, I've already made some major changes to just improving practices and some of the basic documentation, requiring much more justification than was required before. And again, it's an incremental change in terms of an organization that's really adapting to a much more aggressive, centralized role. Looking back at my time at Social Security, it was very, very similar in the sense that I was an internally facing person. I had a really internally facing role, but there, the process was much more of, a partner in things. People there, I think just by nature of what they did, they had so much personal information, they tended to be much more careful, had a history, really strong statutory protection, and more importantly, criminal penalties that attached, rather seriously to the misuse. And so there it was more helping people see that it could be more intrinsic value in other ways. So for example, when designing a web application, really getting down into the micro level of which questions you ask and not ask. It really can be that mix of a role, but it very much ties into your organizational culture as well.
Thank you for that. So instead of asking you what did you do yesterday or what do you do all day, I'm going to ask you what's on your plate. What are some of the policy issues that you're thinking about or that your office is playing a role in or that are keeping you up at night, as I always like to say. While you guys think about that, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we're working on in my part of the corporate sector. Well, we have so many more things at GE than just refrigerators and dishwashers and light bulbs, although I'm sure you're all familiar with those. But some of the things I work with, partnering with not just legal, but IT, thinking about cybersecurity and making the system safe while still protecting the privacy of the data and the people who are affected by these initiatives. And I'm thinking about and working on European data protection rewrites and what that means for us. What other hot issues I'm working on? The conflict of laws issues continues to be an issue for multinational companies. There are lots of initiatives, not just from the U.S. government, but from other governments as well, that require companies to process data or use data for background checks or screening or other sorts of state-sponsored activities that are fulfilled by private sector. And I found the role that I played in the private sector over and over again is saying no to government requests for data, which is, I think, just one of the complications. And having served on both sides of that fence, I'm interested and curious about all this. What are some of the harder policy issues that are on your plate? And I'm going to start with John this time. No, that's no.
As John finishes his last note, I will just do a quick bullets on. I can name 4 off the top of my head, and then Nuala's touched on a couple of them already. But the information sharing environment within the government is definitely a hot topic for us. It's something that is mandated by law that really since 9/11, Congress has said that, and in fact also in the 9/11 report itself, that Congress has mandated that we do a much better job of sharing information with the agencies that need it to carry out their mission. At the same time, they have said there must be very strong privacy protections in conducting that information sharing so that it's properly shared and lawfully shared. So we spend a great deal of brain power. We have a lot of senior staff in our office who work intense hours looking at these information sharing initiatives to make sure that they are respecting all of those privacy obligations. Cybersecurity is certainly another one. Nuala mentioned that I see that as a growth area that was touched on. I think Schneider in his remarks earlier talked about it, but again, the need to both conduct the mission of safeguarding the government's cyber networks, while at the same time that carries with it privacy issues and privacy risks that have to be looked at, safeguarded, and mitigated. So we have actually been very forward-leaning on that with privacy impact assessments, and have a privacy member of our senior staff who is actually co-located with NSA up at Fort Meade, and I can say that that's public, that's in our PIA. The third issue, real quick, is just I would say continuous monitoring and outreach is always working with the many components of DHS to make sure we know all of the systems that are being contemplated or thought about. And I think the thing that would keep any privacy officer up at night are those systems that they don't know about. It's those that you just need to continually be out there inserting yourself into the components and pushing privacy cultures down into the components so that they're aware. Privacy is always an issue to be thought of at the beginning. And then last is the cross-border issue of information sharing, but in the international dimension, which is sharing with our friends and allies. And you have probably read a few articles, at least now, of the initiative to share airline data between the European Union and ourselves. And that's an issue that has started in Nuala's time, and it's still going on now. In fact, these issues are not going to go away. I think they're only going to probably take more and more attention. So those are 4 quick ones.
We've been spending a lot of time on internet advertising issues, and in particular the issue of enhanced notice for online behavioral advertising. And the range of activity associated with that is pretty emblematic of what a privacy leader would do. So part of our time, my time, has been spent representing AOL with the Digital Advertising Alliance and with the Network Advertising Initiative, and sort of forging what the self-regulatory regime will look like. So you're figuring out what makes sense for the company, what makes sense for the industry, how to make that work. Then there's sort of the technical brass tacks of how do you make the icon work on your own systems, and how do you explain it internally? How do you make sure that the opt-outs work? And so you move from sort of a technical implementation to then figuring out, well, how do we make sure that this continues to work the way it's supposed to in an ongoing way? And then you're kind of moving into sort of auditing, monitoring, that sort of thing. So you go from sort of inventing the regime to actual implementation and maintaining it in an ongoing way, and then that iterates, because then there are new issues associated with this that have to get thought through, but issues with sensitive health data and things like that, or future iterations of how the icon is going to work. So that, I think, is a huge amount of the time that I and my team spends with.